our species had been in existence for however hundreds of thousands of years. Make that one day. And we have been hunter-gatherers right up until the last 15 minutes. And this is the new edition. We have had enough sleep right up until the last 5 seconds, because it was the introduction of electric lighting and then television and video games. All of that, if we look at if we take the entire existence of our species and we call it one day, it's got to be just like the last second or two that we suddenly are no longer able to get enough sleep. Because throughout human history, we got enough sleep. It got dark. There was nothing to do.
All right, my guest today is Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman. Dave is a US Army Ranger, a paratrooper, and a former West Point psychology professor. He is a black belt in Hojutsu, the martial art of the firearm, and has been inducted into the USA Martial Arts Hall of Fame. Colonel Grossman's research was cited by the President of the United States in a national address, and he has testified before the US Senate, the US Congress, and numerous state legislatures. He has 5 patents to his name, has published 4 novels, 2 children's books, and 6 non-fiction books to include his perennial bestseller On Killing, with over 500,000 copies sold, and a New York Times best-selling book co-authored with Glenn Beck. Welcome, David. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks. Whoever that guy is you talk about, me go get a life, eh? It's been a good ride, but I'm really tickled by and pleased to be of service in your endeavor to put together your book in a very unique field with a set of skills, and I'm honored to help. Iron sharpens iron. What the Bible says, and I'm pleased to be of service. So,
well, I must say that I actually cut that biography short. There's plenty more that could have been added. I thought we would start with the interview by maybe defining the differences between a warrior and a paramedic. We take a lot of research and knowledge from the military environment and try and adapt it to our civilian world of paramedicine. In your book on combat, you highlight a key difference between the warrior and the paramedic, and that is paramedics stand back. They don't confront the threat. They send others in and then they follow. They don't engage in combat. As a result, how well do you think military knowledge can transition to the civilian world, and what would those key differences be between a warrior and a paramedic?
Yeah. These are all just words, and you can apply them, shuffle them, and as fit. A guy picked up on something of mine quite a while back, and he said a warrior falls and a warrior healer stands up. They go toward the danger, they expose themselves, they rescue people, but in general, they're not doing what they do to stop violent behavior. They're doing what they do to save lives. In law enforcement, I'm a reserve cop, and in law enforcement, our goal is never to kill. We're always trying to save lives. We're using deadly force because we sincerely believe there is no other option in the face of immediate threat of life, limb, or grievous bodily harm. The moment that person is no longer a threat, we'll call the paramedics, we'll slap on a tourniquet, we'll apply CPR. That life is as precious as any other life on the planet. We happen to be using deadly force because it's the only instrument we have. Now, when you leave the domestic realm, then in warfare, we're still, to a large degree, trying to save lives. If the enemy surrenders, we're not going to kill him. If the enemy's wounded, we'll treat him. But as we move up that continuum to our predators and reapers, I tell people that that reaper operator has been ordered to kill that terrorist. If they do not kill that person, they have failed in their mission. But over here on the domestic side of the house, our mission is never to kill. It's kind of a division of roles. We're trying to confront this dangerous behavior, and save lives in that way. Whereas the paramedic is trying to deal with the effects of this dangerous behavior and save lives in that way. They're just two different tools, both of which are dedicated to saving lives under different circumstances. Never lose track of the fact that that police officer is sincerely trying to save lives. They're using a tool that only they are allowed to use, deadly force. We don't call it deadly force because when you're done, the other guy goes out. We call it deadly force because there is a good chance a life might be taken, and it's the only option left to us. But that is not in the toolbox of the paramedic. And that is the defining difference between the two, to my mind, is the tools that are in the toolbox. So while a police officer might slap on a tourniquet, they might apply CPR, their skills are very limited. Their toolbox in life-saving is very limited. And they're very happy to stand aside and let the expert do it. It's interesting, though, how those fields have overlapped. We've got lots of mass murders, and we find the first responding police officers who are the ones that go in first. Very often the paramedics will be coming later. They're responding quickly. But we see the cops slapping on tourniquets, and we see mass murders where the body count is being held down because the police have embraced more of the tools and more of the skills of the paramedic. So there's a blending of those dynamics. I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with a cop having some medical life-saving skills and tools.
Absolutely.
Is there something wrong with a paramedic being able to protect their patient? In America, we've got a dynamic where we've got our SWAT medics, and in the military, U.S. Army medics carry a pistol traditionally. World War I, World War II, Vietnam, the medic carried a pistol because they were going to use deadly force to protect their patients and themselves as needed. Is it appropriate to do so with the paramedic? Well, in America, we've got a dynamic now where we've got that life-saving medical skill right there attached to the SWAT team. And as the SWAT team goes in, that paramedic is prepared to roll out and save lives right there, save the victims of violence right there. But we also, a large amount of the time now, those individuals are armed. So just as a military medic would have a sidearm to protect themselves and others, if we drop off that paramedic and it's part of the SWAT team, and he's there saving lives, and the bad guy comes in a back door, giving him the skills and the tools to protect his patient or her patient is not necessarily a bad idea. So the dynamics of the difference between the warrior and the paramedic, there is a blending in which we see the warrior picking up more of the skills and the tools, slapping on tourniquets. And we see in some select circumstance, the paramedic accepting some of the tools and skills to save lives with the use of deadly force. So it's a continuum. There is an overlap between the fields. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just every circumstance has to be closely examined. We really have to respect every culture. The culture in America of arming paramedics it's a part of our culture. It's almost like a constitutional right to protect yourself and protect others. Other nations look at that profoundly differently, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when we look at this paramedic warrior or paramedic cop continuum, just understand that different cultures have different applications. But the primary tool of the paramedic is to save lives with medical skills and tools. The primary tool of the police officer is to save lives by use of force, whether it's just putting them in a hammerlock and putting cuffs on, whether it's hitting them with OC, whether it's hitting them with a taser, or whether it's hitting them with a pistol. The tool of the police officer is force. There's a force continuum. The tool of the paramedic is medical resources. and they're two distinct fields with some amount of overlap in there, which needs to be recognized. I think what you're doing has great potential for many law enforcement officers to embrace. Many law enforcement officers in America are EMT qualified. Many of them carry a more profound kit of resources than we've ever seen before. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think you could very well see a lot of people embracing your book that you might not have otherwise have thought about as being a potential audience who needs that. Just as you, as a paramedic, were studying on killing and you're studying on combat.
Yeah.
You see police officers and military studying your book and applying it in the same way.
Dave, there's a really interesting parallel, I think, as well. You talk about the skill sets and the different roles of a warrior or a warrior healer. But the situation and the threat doesn't distinguish between the human that's responding to that situation. Regardless, the physiology is the same. And I think that's the really interesting parallel. And that's in fact, you're probably not aware of just how influential your book on combat's been in Australia, but we've trained thousands and thousands of police officers and paramedics. And we embed the use of combat breathing and the building of situational awareness and the maintenance of an ability to treat effectively and be safe in those, or as safe as you can be in a high threat environment, because we know that it really doesn't distinguish. You will feel those physiological effects. I've been in sieges and terrorist attacks, etc., like many of us have, and in those situations as a paramedic, you have just the same physiological response, and so you still need to mitigate that so you can be effective in that setting.
Absolutely. What a great example of the overlap between these fields. And how the universal, that's just so well said, the universal common factor is the human body and how that body responds to stress. Prior to the war, there was a ban in the US Armed Forces on using sports psychology and performance psychology. Because people said just because it works in some stupid game doesn't mean it works when people are trying to kill you. Well, in 20 years of war, we found out it works. If it works in the Olympics, it works in the Super Bowl. Stress is stress. And on combat has been embraced in the pandemic by the medical community, because the stress of a medical professional in a pandemic environment finds themselves using the exact same tools. So what a great point. There's this universal commonality, the Mark I, Mod 1 human body. And that's that common factor that we can all draw upon and build upon. Well said.
Probably extend on that. And what is stress? And basically, is stress ever a good thing?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the most complex topics out there. There's this idea of the inverted U. There's this idea that too little stress, like we wake up out of a dead sleep and we haven't had that first cup of coffee, and then we're obviously at our lowest ebb. As we come up that continuum, we're in our groove, where whatever it might happen to be. The sweet spot for a golfer, or a sweet spot for for somebody making a penalty shot in a hockey game, is entirely different than the sweet spot of the individual making a slap shot in the middle of the game. And so there's this different fields need different levels of arousal. We talk about being in condition yellow or condition red. The basketball player out on the court is in condition red, but the basketball player goes to make a free throw. They use their breathing and pull themselves down to condition yellow. There are a variety of fields who never want to leave condition yellow, must never lose fine motor control. And one of those is obviously the medical community. Helicopter pilots, leaders, snipers, and bomb techs, and paramedics are all examples of individuals who must never lose fine motor control. But they can be under aroused. Like I said, you come out of a dead sleep and have to start slapping on tourniquets. Right? They need that first cup of coffee in the morning. They need to hit the sweet spot. But obviously, they can also be over aroused. And when we look at these fields where the requirement is to have fine motor control, again, bomb tech, helicopter pilot, a first responder in high-speed movement, driving a vehicle at 200 kilometers an hour down the road, that requires fine motor control and staying in the zone. And of course, the medical profession is a great example of somebody when my doc loses fine motor control, while my life is slipped in his hands, I'm having a bad day. And the dynamics become, we identify those professions where staying in condition yellow, never losing fine motor control, is a requirement of their profession. But what we're finding in the modern world is more and more of these individuals, really, we don't want to leave condition yellow. It's very rare. We'll make that snapshot, but it's a rarity. And one of the things that I talk about in my class is nurturing an environment of the quiet professional. And throughout history, we talked about the laconic Spartan, the stoic Roman, the inscrutable samurai, the stiff upper lip Brit. And today we talk about the quiet professional. They're all different ways of saying the same thing, self-control. And as we advance on some kind of historical continuum, higher and higher levels of self-control, this embracing the realm of the quiet professional. What I tell my audiences, whoever they are, medical and law enforcement, military, nobody respects your temper tantrum. We're all human. We all lose it sometimes. But when that happens, we know we made a mistake. We try to do a better job the next time. And as we get older, we can get better. That's why most of us are better grandparents than we were parents, you know. As we get older, we can be better people. But nobody respects your temper tantrum. They respect your calm. If the day-to-day pissant things make you lose your cool, then when lives are being lost and blood is squirting, then if the day-to-day pissant things make you lose your cool, then odds are pretty good you're going to lose your cool in that life and death event. People say, "Oh, it's just an act I put on. You know, I shout at them and I scream at them to get their attention." Nah. We are what we practice to do. And if we practice having temper tantrums, if we practice losing our temper, when things go to hell, that's what we're going to do. So you can be over-aroused, obviously. And particularly when we talk about the medical profession, this is one of those professions when the quiet professional, self-control, is absolutely essential. And it ties in, like I said, with helicopter pilots. A friend of mine is a helicopter pilot. He was there with Task Force 160, the Delta Force of our helicopters. You know, Navy SEALs got Bin Laden, but Army helicopters took him there. And this is one of the guys that took him there. He was there in the invasion of Afghanistan, and he's a legendary pilot. And he got out, and he's now a contracted pilot. He was one of the last birds out of Afghanistan. You know, one of the first in, one of the last out, and he's still a contract pilot. And he talked about pilots being adrenaline junkies. And I said, well, you know, you guys have got to remain calm. He said, yeah, but we like the slow burn. We like the slow burn. You know, it's true that we don't get over-aroused, but we do like to be in the zone. We do like that burn. We do like that adrenaline. We do seek that zone. We seek those environments where our skills are needed. And I think that's a neat way to think of it. You know, we all want to find that zone where our skills are needed, and that adrenaline does come in, but it's got to be a slow burn. It's got to be, you know, just the long-term dynamic. And we got to realize that there is stress for that paramedic, just as there is stress for that frontline officer in blazing gunfights, or that pilot in a life and death situation. All of these have stress, and they have adrenaline dynamics in play. But we're looking at the ones that are seeking that slow burn, and we can respect that.
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting as well, Dave, the way that you said that, you know, you want to stay in the yellow as a medical professional. You want to make sure you still have effective cognitive abilities and fine motor control. But we also know that the confronting nature of a medical situation, particularly when there's a major trauma or someone who's dying in front of you, and even more so when there's been some sort of use of force by police that you're near or you come to afterwards, that there is going to be an elevation into the red or higher And so therefore you need to have practice using gross motor control skills. You've got to practice working in those environments where you may not have your full cognitive abilities to work with. And if you don't, then I think that you're sort of doing yourself a disservice, because you haven't recognized that those events, while you think you can maintain in the yellow, you're going to be elevated and you're going to be under physiological stress.
Yeah, and you know, I've got a younger brother who spun out in the it was really in the 1980s, and with some pretty bad PTSD. He was a paramedic, and he said, "I can't tell you how many people had died, and the last thing they ever heard was a lie coming out of my mouth."
Yeah,
because we used to teach, psychological first aid. You got to be okay. You got to be okay. You got to make it. And then he dies, and the last thing you ever heard was a lie coming out of your mouth.
Yep.
So much of what we do is about thinking things through ahead of times. And now what I tell people is that the line is, the worst is over. The worst is over. We're here now. It's true. It's reassuring. It's powerful. And just having the right words at the right time, saying the right things. And so much of this is about thinking it out ahead of time. And then taking the best practices and sharing them. And to a large degree, that's what I was able to do with On Combat. And to a very large degree, Lee, I think this is what you'll be able to do with your book. I think there's great potential in that.
Potential, yes.
May we all live up to our potential. It's a dangerous word.
It is. I thought maybe a lot of listeners probably aren't aware of what condition yellow and condition red are, or condition white. I was wondering if you could just give a brief overview, because they might be listening to this like, what the hell does that yellow even mean? Yeah. You know,
when it was first put together, when I met Jeff Cooper, talked about awareness levels. You know, when you're at home in bed, and then you're in a dangerous street, you ramp up your awareness levels to condition red. But I took that model and really put some physiological indicators in it. And I've really taken that model a step further. And when we talk about condition yellow, we're talking about a physiological state in which you have not lost fine motor control. And that usually has some heart rate dynamics associated with it. And of course, when we talk about heart rates, it's very important that we're really talking about stress-induced or fear-induced heart rate, sympathetic nervous system arousal. It's not the same as exercise-induced heart rate increase. Although the two have some interaction, it's not the same. So when we talk about this stress-induced heart rate, we really talk about keeping it, below 100, below 120, and having that fine motor control. Then we hit condition red. And again, I like to take the example of a basketball player or a hockey player. And when they're out there making snapshots and slap shots, they're in condition red. And they can do what they do because they've had hundreds of thousands of practice shots. They've rehearsed it and rehearsed it. And bam, almost at an unconscious level, they make that slap shot, they make that snapshot. But give that hockey player, give that basketball player a chance to make a penalty shot. Give them a chance to make a free throw and study what they're doing. You can see the breathing. You can watch them, in most cases, using their breathing. They're pulling themselves down to condition yellow. They're regaining that fine motor control. So some professions require, these are professions in which you've got a limited number of fairly simple actions. Now, calling a hockey player's skills a limited number of fairly simple actions is a little offensive, but the reality is, the stick goes here, the stick goes there. They're not pulling out different instruments. They're not using different skills. They're not adapting to different circumstances. When you got a limited number of skills in a limited environment, you can rehearse those to the point where they're available at an unconscious level. But when you've got the opportunity, the time, and the distance, and you use the breathing, well, I would tell you that to a certain degree, the paramedic realm is one where we strive to live in condition yellow. Now, as was just said, you might strive for it, you're not going to lose it. And so whether it's whether it's slapping on a tourniquet, having rehearsed it and rehearsed it so that the skill is there, whether it's putting in an IV and having rehearsed it and rehearsed it. When we first started getting what we call the combat lifesaver in the U.S. military, in the U.S. Army, the Rangers, the Ranger units pioneered this, and they're all giving each other IVs. And it was like some horror movie, I mean, there's blood everywhere. Scared. All these Rangers are trying to give each other IVs. But they persevered and they drove on and they mastered that skill, and all of them had that skill. But there was an example of some guys who thought they were going to be able to stay on condition yellow. When they started putting in an IV, they found out it's not that easy. And ideally, you should have rehearsed it enough that even if it is a very stressful environment, you might be behind cover and bullets whizzing over your head putting in that IV. And ideally, we want to strive to live in condition yellow, but as Matt just said, it's not always guaranteed. And so our skill set have got to be, and the breathing, obviously we've got tools. The breathing is a tool that keeps us in the zone. We combine that with a skill set and a set of confident rehearsals. And then, of course, there's nothing beats the dynamic of being a veteran, of having done this job so long, have done it so many times, that what stresses other people out, you were able to do in a calm, deliberate manner. And that's our goal. In the law enforcement realm, I've run into 3 different people who were SWAT team leaders. They were SWAT operators who went into real world operations and no longer felt any fear whatsoever. And in 2 out of 3 cases, they quit because they thought they'd lost their edge. Maybe they had, but we say we want to hit the point where the real thing is just like practice. But here's 2 out of 3 people who actually hit that point after decades of experience, after thousands of entries. They'd hit that point where they no longer had that adrenaline rush and they thought they'd lost their edge. Did they? I don't think so. But I think certainly in this paramedic community, you want to reach that point where it's just another day at the office, where I've done this so many times that this is just another day at the office. And I think we will see that far more often in the medical community than in this law enforcement community. And I think I can say without reservation that when you hit that point, it's not a bad thing. It's our goal to be that veteran who's so incredibly calm in a life and death situation, putting in that IV or doing whatever skill it is that they need to have. They've done it so many times that it's just another day at the office. And I think that, that's all that level of arousal and trying to find that optimal level of arousal. But to be able to, that surgeon who's done truly thousands and thousands of this procedure, that surgeon never has the least bit of physiological arousal as they go in the operating room and do this procedure the 10,000th time. And to a certain degree, I think that becomes our goal, certainly in that medical community.
Yeah. That might be a good point to bring in, like stress inoculation. And you said whatever is drilled in during training comes out the other end in combat, no more, no less.
Right.
Could you expand on that quote and maybe talk about how important is realistic training? Because a lot of the training a paramedic does, say at university, will be in a nice air-conditioned lighting room, no really stress going on. It is improving, but it's still very much that way.
Right. And I tell you that we've really got to raise our goal on that. We don't set people up for failure, but if they're able to do the job in a nice air-conditioned room with good lighting, now we've got to ramp up that stress inoculation. We got to have some terrible acid rock music, hammering the walls. We got to have smells. Somebody take a crap in a bucket and take a piss in that bucket. That's the smells of life, and we got to have the smells, and we got to have the sounds, and let's throw in some flickering lights, and slowly ramp these things up in training. And of course, the the goal is to have what we call, peacetime veterans. We look at our troops at the end of World War II, with 4 or 5 years of continuous combat. And what we want to do is have that level of veteran proficiency without paying a terrible price of 4 years of war. And we can do that with realistic, stressful training. Again, don't set people up for failure. We don't send losers off our training site. We don't want, but if he can perform under this circumstance, then let's ratchet it up a little bit and have that smell. And don't lose track of smells as a powerful dynamic. Messing yourself and wetting yourself in a life and death situation is almost the norm. Dealing with traffic accidents or heart attack victims, one of the first things that goes is bowel and bladder control, and having that smell there is an easy thing for us to do. The lighting is not always going to be perfect, and the temperature is not always going to be perfect, and certainly, you can't guarantee that you're going to have pleasant sounds or an absence of sounds. So we ramp up the degree of stress inoculation in our training, and try to create this pre-battle veterans to take somebody who has that level of skill of applying life-saving skills in real life and death events 10,000 times, to have that level of proficiency without having to have 10,000 life and death incidents. That's where we get our stress inoculation in our training. It's a much more efficient and economical way to gain those skills than to have to wait until after they've done it for 20 years or after they've been in all these life and death events. We create that level of proficiency ahead of time. And that's the goal of stress inoculation. You do not rise to the challenge, you sink to the level of your training. And that includes all the skills. I'm a reserve cop, I'm a reserve deputy coroner. And we recently went through a training event, and one lady's job was to give every one of us a shot as we came through. And she went through the mechanism of rolling up your sleeve and hitting it with the alcohol swab and breaking it out, and everything except the needle going in the skin was being rehearsed. And I thought, man, this is brilliant. Because when the real thing comes, all of us have already been there. We've done it as far as we can, short of actually having this, puncture. And when she does it, she's already been through all of this. This is such a great example of realistic training. And the resources that were dedicated to doing it by the numbers. When the real thing comes, I've been around this block once before. I knew this was going to happen, and that really becomes our goal.
Is there any tips, Dave, that you've got for training in ways that mimic some of the stressful effects on people's physiology, without having to go to high fidelity, immersive, full training? Because that can be quite hard to do, quite hard to get together. And we train quite often when we're bringing people into learning about combat breathing and the physiological response to stress. We use exercise, which, as you said, is not a great correlation, but we use it as a tool just to say, look, this is, heart rate's up. It's not a direct correlation, but this is what it feels like. Now do those skills and use your breathing to try and get yourself back down a little bit. Is there any other ways that you've found, maybe through a competition or any other ways that might instill some of those same physiological effects?
Yeah, competition is a great example. Striving against a standard. In America, bowling leagues have gone out, and shooting teams have gone out, and around the world, we're not big on bowling leagues, but the martial arts, there's 20 million Americans in the martial arts striving against a standard. Striving to get that next belt. That's something we kind of understand. So I tell you that putting people under time limitations, putting people under stressful dynamics, in the military, we have our EFMB, Expert Field Medical Badge, and the EIB, Expert Infantry Badge. And is different than the Combat Field Medical Badge and the Combat Infantry Badge. But it is a set of tests, and you wear it on your chest, and it's quite an achievement to have got that EFMB, that Expert Field Medical Badge. And the things that you would ordinarily do suddenly become a lot more stressful when you're striving for that badge. When you've got a time limit and you've got a set of standards that you've got to meet, all of a sudden, all the things that were easy, it's amazing how many people drop out of the competitive process because what was easy for them suddenly becomes difficult when they find themselves under stress and striving for a standard. So obviously competition, striving against a standard is a really good dynamic. And I love the whole model of the martial arts, achieving this level and now you're striving for that next level and coming up to different levels of performance under stress. Again, competition is good, but our culture as a whole has kind of moved away from competition. We don't like it, but there's nothing wrong with it. But I tell you that striving against a standard, that's something people can wrap their mind around. And our culture appears to be pointed in that direction, and we can go with the flow and have a set of different qualifications that are based on different skills, and the skills performed under field conditions with time standards or other restraints that create stress in the situation. And again, don't lose track of sounds and lights and temperature and smells, but also recognize this human dynamic of striking against a standard or competition as an excellent tool to increase that stress level and to create that stress inoculation.
And the nice thing about it, I think, too, is that it's internal. The person puts the stress on themselves.
It really is. But another thing too is an audience. If they've got a lot of people watching, this
Very
is just a universal human dynamic. And when people are watching, it becomes more stressful.
Yep.
So that's a stressor we can throw in as well. We're all taking turns. We're all watching each other. And,
I remember being a student paramedic, and every time I got a public job, it'll be like, oh my God, I'm in public, compared to like when you just walk into someone's house and it's just mum and dad there or whatever.
It's a failure in our training if you're doing it in public in front of an audience, and you haven't had some degree of that in your training of having an audience. And so that's a great example.
Yeah. One of the stories that really captured me about training was how some police officers were dying with bullet cases in their pockets, because that's how they were taught to train to capture it, so they didn't have to clean it up. I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit about that story and expand on how important it is to be so realistic in our training and on how you would actually apply it in the field.
For a century, I mean, from the 1850s until the 1960s, for over a century, law enforcement officers carried revolvers, and we would fire 6 shots out of a revolver. And one of the biggest pain in the asses you ever run into is policing brass. If you ever had to go on the range and pick up your brass, it's a huge pain in the ass. But if you fire 6 shots and put the brass in your hand, put the brass in your pocket, reload and keep going. Pretty clever. Police the range as you go, right? Clean up as you go. But what we found was case after case with cops that in a gunfight with a pocket full of brass and no idea how it got there. And the point of that story is that you don't rise to the challenge, you sink to the level of your training. That little administrative thing that you threw in there is exactly what's coming out the other end. And just be very, very careful. Again, how much I admired that medical professional who was taken, each it's a bunch of expired medical items, but she's taking each one out of the plastic and going through the process of swiping the arm and going through the process of using each one separately and going through that process completely, as opposed to just going through the motions. The more realistic we can make it, up to and including taking a bunch of expired medical items and using them as training items and going through the process of stripping every one of those out of the plastic and using every one of those. Just identify that little administrative thing that we throw in there to make life easier for ourselves and realize in the end it's actually counterproductive because it will come out on the other side.
Changing subject a bit, sleep. Sleep has been identified as a key factor for resilience and performance, especially in the last 5 or so years. something I think paramedics do very poorly is, especially in relation to shift work, is managing sleep. How does a lack of sleep affect performance and resilience?
Yeah. You know, we're in the middle of a global epidemic of sleep deprivation. Do an online search for that and you'll just be blown away. And this sleep deprivation is a key factor in suicides. We don't understand that one of the best meta studies on suicide says not only is sleep deprivation a key factor, it's the most remediable factor. If we really gave a damn about suicides, if we really wanted to control suicides, the first thing we'd look at is sleep. It's a key factor in traffic deaths. Now, those are two causes of deaths that have exploded worldwide. Traffic deaths and suicides have exploded. And again, the two major killers of our cops, two major killers of our firefighters are not, the job, it's suicide and traffic deaths. And if we gave a damn about those two things, the place we'd look is sleep. You know, we've got this dynamic now where police officers want to have 12-hour shifts like firefighters. And work 12-hour shifts, get all that time off. We tell them, well, firefighters get to sleep on the job. We got a saying that says only firefighters and prostitutes make money in bed. But the truth is that a lot of those EMS and a lot of those fire guys working 12-hour and 24-hour shifts, they don't have a guarantee of getting sleep during that time. And that's horrendously dysfunctional. That to have intentionally put somebody in a situation which there's a very high probability of being sleep deprived, and to make them the individuals responsible for making life and death decisions is unacceptable. In almost every first world nation, truck drivers are required to log enough sleep. Airline pilots around the world are required to log enough sleep, not just the pilot, but the flight attendant, and at least across most of America, the mechanic who works on the plane is required to log enough sleep. They cannot have some kind of moonlighting job. They cannot, do flight after flight after flight stacked on top of each other. There's laws to prevent that. So we've got this model that nuclear power plant operators, tugboat operators, Amtrak engineers, railroad engineers, tugboat operators, and many, many other professions are required by law to get enough sleep, but first responders are not. And that should enrage us. That should just absolutely enrage us. This is the great, big, huge, low-hanging piece of fruit that if we gave a damn about suicides, if we gave a damn about traffic deaths, and if we really gave a damn about performance of people making these life and death decisions, we'd get this fixed. Having sleep-deprived people making these life and death decisions is like having a sleep-deprived pilot flying your plane. It's unacceptable. And people say, well, then we wouldn't have enough. Then hire more and pay them more, and we can do this. We're at a point in time in which our nations have a lot of wealth and resources. We're wealthy nations. When things go wrong, we throw money at it. And we need to throw money at this. We need to let people know that they should be mad about this. They should be angry about this. After 18 hours without sleep, your impaired judgment equal to 0.08 legally drunk. So if some paramedic showed up drunk, working on it, you tell them, get the hell away from me, 24 hours without sleep, your impaired judgment equal to 0.10 above legally drunk. And 2 nights without sleep, you're psychotic. Any graduate of Army Ranger School will tell me about hallucinations on the 3rd day without sleep. And we've got people that are moonlighting jobs and then doing a 24-hour shift as a firefighter or EMS. They're doing a 24-hour shift, and instead of getting the sleep they think they get a series of incidents, never a chance to sleep. And these people are truly borderline psychotic. When you start getting that you had 2 nights without sleep on that 3rd day, you will see things and hear things that are not there. And that individuals at that level of fatigue, individuals at that level of reduced performance are making life and death decisions with your life. That should enrage us. This is something that why don't we have national campaigns to get this fixed and hold these people to a higher standard. But it really begins with our doctors in medical school, and it goes on to the doctors in internships, in which we have these horrendous shifts for them. And in America, there's been recent rules, and they're looking at tightening up the rules even more for our medical professionals. But of all the professions out there, somehow that medical profession is the one where we're not really tightening the screws on sleep deprivation and quality of sleep. And again, if I were king, I'd give every first responder a Fitbit, a fitness tracker. I'm a huge science geek. My favorite website is sciencedaily.com. I check every category, almost every category every day. There's a great study on which of the fitness trackers was doing the best job of tracking sleep. And the Fitbit kind of floated to the top of the list. And the other one was one that's a ring, by the way, that was kind of interesting. I think that the one we can all kind of embrace is that Fitbit. And you put this thing on your wrist, you download the app, and it keeps track of your sleep. Well, what we're seeing is in our college sports teams, in our professional sports teams, the coach is putting a Fitbit on all these guys and tracking their sleep, because performance athletically, sleep's a critical dynamic. And of course, what they do is one guy stays back and gets a good night's sleep and wears everybody else's fitness trackers. The coach figures that out real fast. I mean, that works for a little while, guys, but the coach figures that one out real fast. There's always an ebb and flow to these kind of things, but keeping track, wearing that fitness tracker and keeping track of people's sleep is the next step in bringing ourselves to a new level of performance. This is an area where technology can work for us, and we've got to track that. I mean, again, if you're a college football coach and you're using this, how much more so should we use this asset, this resource, in life and death situations with individuals who are literally holding lives in their hands? Need to be held to that standard. This is the great area where we can make the greatest progress is sleep deprivation and quality of sleep. Sleep in a totally dark room. I work again with a lot of the fire services across America, and the fire guys all sleep in the bunkhouse, the bunk room, and they got a guy called the light Nazi. And this is the guy that spray paints the windows from the inside with black paint. I tell them, guys, the light Nazi is right. The research is there. The science is there. You're the one that's wrong, not him. But combine it with the sleep mask and have that sleep mask. There's so many sleep hygiene things we could dig into. Alcohol. There's nothing wrong with one drink on the way to bed, but don't use alcohol to put yourself to sleep. Anything more than one drink, you get a very counterproductive dynamic. And I tell people, wear that Fitbit, track your sleep, pound down 4 beers and go to bed and see what it does to your sleep. You'll fall quickly into a shallow sleep. You'll wake up in a couple hours and can't get back to sleep. Again, nothing wrong with a beer on the way to bed, but anything more than that is really counterproductive. And we know this. Caffeine, we're in the middle of a global epidemic of caffeine abuse, the mega doses of caffeine that we're pounding down. As of right now, the U.S. Armed Forces have been at war for over 20 years. We're still in Iraq. We're still at war. And for the first 15 years, we passed out these energy drinks like water. They gave them to us by the palletfuls. We passed them out to the troops. Aren't we nice guys? And then 3 major Department of Defense-wide studies on the energy drinks. And today, for all practical purposes, there is a complete ban on issuing energy drinks to U.S. Armed Forces. They're like alcohol. If you want to buy your own under the right circumstance, we're not going to stop you. You're an adult, but we'll never give it to you. In an academic environment, the one taking the most energy drinks were the ones with the worst grades. In a tactical environment, the one pounded down the most energy drinks were the ones most likely to nod off on the job. But they're never going to tell you shouldn't be taking this stuff. They're never going to tell you your kid shouldn't have a cell phone. The thing's most likely to kill your kid is suicide and traffic deaths. And that text message in the middle of the night and that video game your kid's playing on the cell phone is killing them. They're not going to tell you that. So we got this caffeine industry that's invested in you taking their product. We've got this video game industry, the cell phone industry that's invested in selling their product to you and selling it to your kids. instead of being reasonable. You know, the head of Netflix recently said their number one competitor was not other online providers. Their number one competitor was sleep. The corporate policy of Netflix is to steal your sleep. They don't care that sleep deprivation takes years off your life. They don't care that it's a key factor in heart disease and obesity. They don't care that it's destroying your relationship and your life and your performance. They just want to sell their product. So my dad started smoking in 1940 when he was 5 years old. He plunked a nickel on the counter, bought his first pack of Bull Durham tobacco and rolling papers, and began smoking at 5 years old. Hey, candy rots your teeth, right? Everybody knows that. Candy rots your teeth. It's his money. He wants to buy cigarettes. My doctor smokes. My dentist smokes. Everybody smokes. The cigarettes are good for you. They believe that. And we fought this industry for decades over one thing. Stop selling this stuff to children and stop denying the negative impact of your product on adults. And that's where we're at right now with the caffeine industry and the electronic industry that will just hammer us. They want us to binge watch the shows. They want us to play the video games all night long. They want us to text message all night. They want us on social media all night long. The internet never sleeps. And this stuff is killing us. We got to get this stuff under control. And obviously, it's the area where we need to get the greatest dynamics. And Australia could lead the world as being the first nation to mandate sleep for all first responders. And whoever does that first is really going to save vast numbers of lives. China has just mandated that online gaming for children 18 and below, as a child, you cannot play online games except 1 hour Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, 1 hour a day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's it. China's going to see their suicides go down. They're going to see their traffic deaths go down. And one other cause of death that's exploded is opiate overdoses, opiate epidemic. Why opiates? Prescription opiates have always been there. Why are they suddenly the drug of choice? Well, sleep deprivation creates chronic pain. The tendons and muscles never chance of another online search, chronic pain, sleep deprivation, boom. See the data, see the research out there. And doc, I heard all the time, you give me a pill to fix, you don't need a pill, you need more sleep. Yeah. And you got to knock off the caffeine shortly after lunch because that caffeine is stopping you from getting deep cycle sleep. So that's kind of the key dynamics that are out there with three major causes of death that have exploded worldwide. Traffic deaths, decade after decade, we brought traffic deaths down, airbags, seatbelts, medical technology. Now everywhere they're back up again. What is the new factor? Suicides. Some of the military research tells us a sleep-deprived soldier is up to 5 times more likely to take their life. 3 causes of death have exploded: opiate overdoses, traffic deaths, and suicides. And we got this irresponsible industry, like the tobacco industry, selling to my dad when he was 5 years old, who is refusing to accept any social responsibility for their products. And so in the face of this predatory industry, we've got to take decisive action ourselves to protect ourselves and to protect our sleep. And I tell everybody, guard your sleep, protect your sleep. Sleep is that little vacation that waits at the end of every day. And you want to protect it. My little grandson, he ain't so little no more, he's in his 2nd year of college. But he's heard my class many times. He's helped me out many times. He went off to college, and my gift to him was 2 different kinds of sleep masks. The 2 of the best ones online, on Amazon. And I said, promise me you'll wear this. He said, yes, sir. Promise me you'll take care of your sleep. The 3 things most likely to kill my grandson are suicide, traffic deaths, and opiate overdoses. And good sleep and quality sleep and wearing that sleep mask to be in a truly dark environment is the single greatest gift I can give to my grandchild. And that is true of any of us. It's the greatest gift we can give ourselves, we give our families, we give our children. In the face of this predatory industry whose corporate policy is to steal your sleep, we've got to take responsibility for our lives and our performance. We don't really need that second job. We don't need all that money. We need sleep. Pace yourself for the long game. We need 4-quarter players. We need seasoned players. And this epidemic of sleep deprivation is absolutely destroying the very foundation of our civilization. And it represents the greatest medical threat out there for all of us first responders and those that are focused in that direction.
I think when you look at the rates of PTSD and suicide amongst paramedics, certainly in Australia, I'm sure it's global. A lot of it's always put down to this is as a result of the things you've seen and the things you've been to and the jobs that you've been exposed to. But is there a recognition that actually, we are a permanently sleep deprived workforce because we work 12-hour shifts, 4 days in a row, double night shifts. There's a need to not sleep through a 12-hour shift. That often blows out to 15, 16 hours. And like you said, that's similar to being inebriated in the way that you can. So it's not just the inability to respond effectively and make complex decisions under stress, which is what paramedics do, that impact on people's life and death outcomes, but also the sequelae of PTSD and suicide that occur to the paramedics that aren't getting the sleep as well. And it's the most dangerous phrase in the world, right? It's the way we've always done it. And
it is a great defining challenge of our age. It really is. And as individuals, we've been left on our own, ourselves and our families, our own professional, dynamics. We've got to have, number one, the information. And then number two, we've got to have the determination to do something with it. It is the defining challenge of our age. And it's destroying us. It really is.
Yep.
Yeah, I liked in the story in the book about how the difference between World War II soldiers and Iraq and Afghanistan, where they would come back after a battle, and in World War II they'll go straight to sleep, get some shut eye. Where in Afghanistan and Iraq they'll start playing video games.
Yeah, I had one sergeant major tell me that his guys were in combat every day, but they're rotating back to kind of a semi-barracks environment, right? So they got hot showers, they got good food, and they're playing video games all night long. So the sergeant major said, it's lights out at 10 o'clock. He said, if I find you playing video games after 10 o'clock, I'm going to take your games. He said, in a week, I had a closet overflowing with video games. They said, these are good troops. They wouldn't disobey an order, but they can't not play those games. So instead of coming home and depressurizing and having a beer and talking and getting a good night's sleep, they're doing exactly the opposite. They're keeping ramped up. They're continuing to stay ramped up. They think, oh yeah, this calms you down. No, it doesn't. The research is there. You know it doesn't. You never get a chance to relax. And within the U.S. Armed Forces, when we look at brigades and battalions who are in the field, they're in Spartan conditions. Hot showers are almost non-existent. No electronics. They're in the field for months on end. Zero suicides. Zero suicides, zero traffic deaths. One of the best things we can do is take away electricity, and our troops will thrive. So it is this defining challenge of our age, and the individuals who are responsible for our information are kind of invested in misrepresenting the situation. So it's on us to go ahead and make that change and to make that challenge and to meet that challenge for ourselves, for our families, and for our mates, for our comrades.
One of the things for me from all the research I've been doing for the book that I've noticed is this big gap between what's common and what's actually normal. So we've gone so far away of actually being human. We're not, for 40,000 or however long, many years we've been around here, we've been getting good sleep in the pitch black. We haven't been drinking alcohol. We haven't been consuming caffeine. We haven't been playing video games in the last 100 years. That's all changed. And even like obesity, it's like obesity now seems to be common, but it's certainly not normal. And I think there's a blurred line at the moment between what's normal and what's actually common.
You made me think about something. This is the first time I've ever said this, and we're taking an initial shot at it. We have a book coming out in about a year called On Hunting, and a couple of Canadian co-authors that are magnificent. They co-authored the book Secrets of Mental Marksmanship. Just look for it online. Secrets of Mental Marksmanship, second edition. It's the best thing ever done on applying sports psychology to life and death situations. Secrets in Marksmanship, second edition. The first edition is going for like $300, and you got to dig a little deeper, find the second edition. Full disclosure, I'm actually the publisher of that book. I love it so much. It came up that the publisher went out of business. I said, I want to publish this book. I wrote the forward of the book. It says it all in the forward, but best book I read in 30 years. But in this book on hunting, we talk about how, if our species had been in existence for however hundreds of thousands of years, make that one day, and we have been hunter-gatherers right up until the last 15 minutes. And this is the new edition. We have had enough sleep right up until the last 5 seconds, because it was the introduction of electric lighting and then television and video games, all of that. If we look at if we take the entire existence of our of our species and we call it one day, it's got to be just like the last second or two that we suddenly are no longer able to get enough sleep. Because throughout human history, we got enough sleep. It got dark. There was nothing to do. So we've been blindsided by this technology of electric lighting and television, and now all of these other intrusive, amazingly addictive technologies. We got to get that under control as individuals, as families, and as nations, and as a civilization. This is the great defining challenge of our age, and anything you can do to grab that ball and run with it would be an amazing achievement all by itself.
My wife's starting to think I'm going a bit crazy. She came home the other night and I bought all these candles, and I'm like, we've got too much light just before we go to sleep. So now I'm lighting all these candles, and she's like, oh, this is romantic. I'm like, no, it's nothing like that. I just want to sleep better.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
But hey,
benefit that comes with it. I mean, it's a win-win.
It's a win-win. Everyone should be doing it. So going off sleep now, one of the terms I really liked is unconscious competence, and that should be our goal of all paramedics, as you mentioned, as it is for warriors. I was just wondering if you could talk about what is unconscious competence and why would it be so important?
It was really pioneered by Abraham Maslow. And his hierarchy of needs, with powerful stuff, a wise guy. But he talked about, the worst level is unconscious incompetence. And, every American boy thinks he knows how to drive. He's unconscious incompetence. He didn't even know that he's incompetent. He didn't even know. He's seen all the shows. He sat in a car for a lifetime. He gets behind the wheel and he's immediately confident of his skills. He's a great example of unconscious incompetence. But firearms is a great example. Again, every American male thinks he's an expert at firearms. Pick up a gun and boom, that unconscious incompetence. But American females are at conscious incompetence. And trainers will tell you all the time, it's so much easier to train a woman once we understand that there's a little different dynamics. But when we train a woman well in marksmanship, she will come to levels of performance far faster because she's at a level of conscious incompetence. She knows she has no skills and she comes to the table seeking those skills. The next level of performance is conscious competence. Right? We're competent, but we got to think about it. We've got to focus on it. And of course, the ultimate goal is this level of unconscious competence in which you're able to perform at this level almost without conscious thought. That putting the IV in or applying CPR, whatever the skill is, slapping on a tourniquet, you've done it so many times that you truly can do it without thinking and do something else at the same time. We truly are not able to multitask. We're fooling ourselves thinking we multitask. We're skipping from one to another. We're good at transitioning. But when you really have got something, a basic motor skill like slapping on a tourniquet, you can think about something else at the same time and be ready to transition to the next medical need. So that's, just a very simple skill that we can all wrap our mind around, putting on a tourniquet. You hit a point where even in a life and death situation with bad lighting and bad smells and bad stuff going on, You slap on that tourniquet, and while you're doing it, you're thinking about what the next step is. That's a great example of unconscious competence. You slap on that tourniquet and can spend that time thinking about what your next step is going to be and what needs to be done, and then transition quickly into that step. And that becomes our goal, really, is that level of unconscious competence, to be so good at what we do that we perform that skill and can have some RAM left over in this big computer here to be able to focus on what the next task will be or what the broader requirements of the circumstance may be.
Mm-hmm. You founded the Killology research group that studies the act of killing. It comes from your book on killing. My biggest fear as a paramedic is making a mistake that could be fatal or that could lead to someone dying or ultimately kill someone. I'd love to get your opinion on overcoming this fear and the psychology of how mistakes can lead to self-doubt.
Yeah. Say that again. The psychology of how mistakes lead to
self-doubt.
Self-doubt.
Yeah.
Self-doubt.
Self-doubt.
Gotcha. Got it.
Yeah.
You know what? Like, that's a hard one, because the truth is, any doctor will make mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, you perform the same procedure, 10,000 times, and 1 out of 1,000 may not survive. And there's things you could have done if you were just a little bit smarter, a little bit better. Whatever that doctor is, whether he's that guy cutting out a cancer, whether it's that guy that's that's dealing with whatever precise medical skill that's needed, and really a life and death dynamic. It's great to think about the guy that's cutting out the cancerous tumor. And did I get it all? Have I gotten it all? Have I done it properly? They recognize the fact that we're going to lose a certain percentage of our cancer patients. When I was running a ROTC unit at Arkansas State University, I had a lot of nurses. These are guys that are going through the nursing program, and a lot of them were worked as paramedics. They talked about how seldom CPR worked, how often they would perform CPR and kept nothing out of it.
Yeah.
And that really surprised me, because they were living with the fact that this guy's dead, and I tried to save him. I provided CPR, and we've really learned more about CPR. We know how to do it better now. We've really kind of progressed on that whole process. But you're going to lose some. You're going to fail some. It's inevitable. It's human dynamics. And yet there is that dynamic of constantly questioning ourselves and doubting ourselves. One way to look at that is, how do other communities deal with it?
It's more like people that I don't have a problem when people die. Like, it's as long as I've done my job well. So I completely understand that, I did my best, but unfortunately this time it didn't work. Or, there's a drug we give called tenecteplase that, 1 in 100 will have a stroke. So if that one person has a stroke, well, we knew they were the odds, and unfortunately it's happened to that person, but I did my best to prevent a heart attack. So that doesn't really bother. It's more if you make that mistake that led to the death is where
the obvious, blatant, irrefutable mistake. Because you were sleep deprived, or because you were rushed, or because you were distracted. And you make that obvious rookie mistake that could end up losing a life. Yeah, that's a hard one. And again, it goes back to stress inoculation and proper training, but also recognition that we're all human. Even though you did make that obvious rookie mistake, you were doing your best. You were sleep deprived, or there was some circumstances going on that made you perform at less than your best. The best football team on the planet can be beat, on X day by X team. We're all human. We all have our up days and down days. I don't know that there's a real good answer to that, other than to recognize the fact that you are doing your best, You recognize the fact that, 1 out of 100 of the people who receive this med is going to get a stroke. And I've done my best. Well, recognize the fact that we're all human. Recognize the fact that X amount of time, we're going to perform below our optimal level. All we can do is try to control our circumstances. And the one thing we have control of is our sleep. And getting sleep discipline, saying, I don't need that second job. I don't need to do these things. I need to stay focused on saving lives and focused on my family and focusing my time appropriately and getting enough sleep on a daily basis. And sleep, of course, is just this one example of the kind of things that we can control. So there's a really powerful dynamic to all of this that I think is almost universal, and it's classic Stoicism. And it really, if it's embraced by early Christianity, it really is something we can all wrap our mind around. But identify the things that you can't control and let go of them. Turn them over to a higher power. That's why, my book on spiritual combat, it's good to have a higher power. It's good to be able to hand things over to somebody else. Identify all the things you can't control and let go of them. Identify the things you can control and do them. So what can you control? You can go to sleep tonight in a dark room. You can get online and order a sleep mask and start sleeping in the dark. You can budget your money and budget your resources so that you're getting enough sleep and you're dedicating enough hours to sleep. These are things you can control. There's only one thing in the universe you control. It's yourself. What other people are doing, what the government's doing, nothing to do about that. Except, once every couple of years when you vote, right? The only thing in the universe you can control is yourself right now. And if we give way to cynicism, if we give way to complacency or denial or bitterness, that's the one thing we can control. And you've given the world a victory at your own hand, and we will not give them that victory. And so it really comes back to an entire body of thought that goes back to the Romans and the Greeks of Stoicism. It is not the thing itself that distresses us, but the way we respond to it. And we can control how we respond to it. I'll give you an example now. I retired from the Army 24 years ago. I've been on the road, over 200 days a year for 24 years, primarily training law enforcement. I am, by almost anybody's definition, America's #1 law enforcement trainer, and probably the world's #1 law enforcement trainer. I believe I'm the only person who's ever been post-certified in all 50 states and so on. Well, now we've got the defund the police movement in America. And we've got the Antifa guys, and they declared me public enemy #1. And I get threat letters from these guys. Criminology is not about teaching people to be criminals. Killology is not about teaching people to kill. But they take that and they run with it. You're the bitch ass cop trainer, been taking these people to kill black people, and when they send me that letter, they want to hurt me. I can't stop them from sending that letter, but I can impact how I respond. So I've got some candies that I hoard, and maybe once a week I'll have one of them, And when I get one of those letters, I get a chocolate covered cherry. You're a sick bastard. We told you what an evil person you are, and you get a chocolate covered cherry. Yeah, that's right. So who wins? Who wins now? That's the one thing I can control. And I can choose to put a positive light on these things. It's not the thing itself that distresses us, but how we respond to it. So find a way to take whatever that is and turn it into a positive, whether it's giving yourself some kind of a treat or giving yourself some kind of a reward. What they meant to be negative, you can turn into something positive. And again, the only thing you can control is how you choose to respond to what the world does. And that's just my little example of taking what they meant to harm you and turning it into something positive. So just take that for what it's worth, but it comes back to classic Stoicism and recognizing that the one thing you can control is how you choose to respond to these things. So something went wrong. Let's say you made that mistake. How are we going to deal with it? More training. more sleep, better nutrition. Identify the things we can control and do it so it doesn't happen again. And that's the only thing you can do. You let go of everything else. One of the hardest things to let go of is the past. Everything in the past is done. You can't do anything about it. You got to let go of it. And that's one of those dynamics. As we get older, we can be wiser. We can be a little bit better at controlling these things and controlling ourselves and how we choose to respond to these things.
Yeah.
So that comes back to almost a universal dynamic of enormous value. Is this classic stoicism, recognizing the fact that there's only one thing in the world I can change. I can't change what the world does to me. I can only change how I choose to respond to that. And we can turn those things into a positive. And that becomes our goal. And that may be one of the greatest gifts we can give to anybody. It's just to embrace that mindset and to run with that to the best of their ability. And then, of course, the other half of that equation is really having that spiritual dynamic in your life that gives you something to lean on and to recognize there's more involved here than just ourselves. And falling into that greater level of understanding is got utility. Yeah.
One of my things is like, one would be like also taking ownership of it and accountability. And I also like the quote of like, accept it as if you chose it.
Oh, wow, that's a great line. I'm going to steal that. I like that. You probably stole it from somebody too, it's great. What a great, accept it like you chose it. Because, you've chosen to be a paramedic. You chose to fall in that environment where this thing is going to happen. You chose the path that made this happen. So accept it like you chose it. That's really good. I like that.
I wanted to, so I got 2 questions at the end that I ask every guest that comes on. So I want to make sure we have time for them. So just wanted to check to make sure we're good for time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Before we get to that, I just wanted to talk about the concept of the sheepdog.
Yeah.
I thought we couldn't.
And again, the sheepdog's not a bad model. You know what? We're just the protector. We're the person that's there in their hour of need. We're the one that rises to the challenge. And of course, it's been attacked. The whole defund the police people and Antifa people, they hate that model. They attack that model. So it's just a metaphor. But there's a law enforcement trainer that says, well, we're going to be the shepherd. We're the shepherd. Well, it's just a model. But, the shepherd decides who's mutton and who's lamb chops. The shepherd shears you once a year. The shepherd decides when you're born and when you die. I know who my shepherd is, and the truth is that that's a scary metaphor, because the sheep are critters and the shepherd is a human being. The sheepdog is just another critter. We're not superior. We're just another critter. But when the wolf shows up, our moment of truth rises. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we've got to recognize the fact that whatever we would choose, whatever we would do, they would attack it. They're going to attack it, whatever we do. And so the sheepdog model has turned out to be an awful good model. A lot of people have embraced it. I actually have a U.S. trademark on the wall, a certificate for sheepdog as a term for protector, and I give people permission. I write them a nice letter, suitable for framing, giving them permission to use the phrase in whatever they're doing, And I think we really struck a chord in people with this sheepdog model, and it's a good model. We're not superior beings. We're just another critter. But when our moment comes, this is what we live for. This is what we've trained for. And I think the paramedic can very well fall into that same environment. You're not there biting the wolf, but you're there binding the wounds. You're there saving the life of the flock in their moment of greatest need. And you're a different kind of sheepdog. The skills that you provide are not necessarily confronting the wolf, but you are dealing with the harm the wolf has done. And this is your moment of truth. This is your hour to shine. And there's nothing wrong with that. And once again, you're not a superior creature. You're just another critter But when your moment comes, you can do things for the flock that nobody else can do. And that's a beautiful and worthy model to embrace. We're not superior by any stretch to any other human being, but in one set of circumstance, we can shine. And we yearn for that opportunity, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I like because the sheepdog, when I was reading it, it resonated with me because the sheepdog's always ready, and they actually want the wolf to arrive.
Yeah. And I tell you what else, people like dogs. People like dogs. I got my lab, my chocolate lab, under the right circumstance, I call her in here, put him up my lap. Hey, look at all the good people up there. And people like dogs. We see a dog, we love that, So there's nothing wrong with being a dog. People love that. We're the rescue dog. We're the elaborate, we're that Saint Bernard with that keg of brandy, that rescues you in your moment of need. And people like that. Good dog. People like dogs. And I think, from just a straightforward psychological warfare dynamic, embracing dogs as our model has got a lot of value. And attacking dogs is kind of, we put our attackers on a bad footing. We've set them up where they got to attack dogs, and we all like dogs, attacking a dog is counterproductive to good PR out there today. So there's nothing wrong with embracing that model, I think. And, whatever that may be, that big Saint Bernard up there in the Alps, or that keg of whiskey that shows up when you need them, good dog. So it's a good model, and there's utility to it.
Yeah. Matt, did you have any other questions you wanted to?
No, no other questions. I just wanted to say though, Dave, before Lee asks those two final questions, just how much of a impact I think you've had in Australia, certainly on a personal level. When I was in the army in combat roles, On Killing, in the 90s when I first read it, had a huge effect on me, and was an amazing text. And then since becoming a paramedic and working in this industry over the last 15 plus years, On Combat's become more and more influential. And I think I'd just like to let you know that there's been a huge amount of transference of your concepts and the information that you put out through your books that we've trained on through all different aspects of the first SWAT medic team that we've created in Australia, the first Thames team, all the training we've run for law enforcement officers in doing medical response to high threat incidents, and also right across a whole bunch of paramedic teams as well. I genuinely think that the concepts that you've given us have saved hundreds of lives. And I can think of a bunch of times when people have been able to respond more effectively, go into more dangerous situations, be able to apply life-saving interventions and come out of it more protected. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for everything that you've given us and that we've been able to use in real life situations.
Thanks, Matt. That really means a lot to me. And one of my final points, then we'll get to your last two questions here, and is, things are far, far worse than we think they are. Medical technology is holding down the murder rate. Paramedic slaps on a tourniquet, saves a crime victim's life, you prevented a murder. So the ever-increasing medical technology is ever more holding down the murder rate. So when people say, the murder rate has gone up, but it's not like it was in the 1990s, that's a lie. That's like comparing minimum wage. Oh yeah, but look, you're making 10 times more than your father did. It's inflation, and we all know that. So imagine if every economist on the planet was saying, yeah, but you're making so much more money than your father did, and never allowed for inflation. Well, the entire field of criminal justice, the entire field of criminal science is lying, because they say, well, this is nothing compared to the 1990s, so this is not nearly as bad as one. That's a lie. To compare between now and the 60s, we have to multiply by a factor of about 10. It's really, really much, much worse than it looks out there. The number one untold story, the number one misrepresented circumstance in the world today is just how desperately bad crime has become and violence has become. And guys like you saving lives every day are holding down the murder rate. And we've got to, like we have inflation adjusted dollars, We need medically adjusted murders. When we do that, it will transform the way we see our world. But you understand, I understand, it's much worse than it looks out there.
Yep.
And how very, very desperately the world needs what you have to give. And it is truly rewarding to be of service to people who are out there in what I believe are the most violent peacetime era we have ever seen. The violence in the Old West is a Hollywood myth. Around the world, we're living with levels of violence that nobody ever dreamed of. And the docs are out there saving lives, and we confiscate all the guns and they kill them with a bow and arrow. We're doing the best we can out there, and still they're out there. And how much worse would it be without people like you out there every day saving lives? So the number one untold story that if I could just get up on my soapbox and have the whole world know one thing is how desperately bad it really is, and how people like you saving lives every day are concealing the magnitude in which people are trying to hurt each other. And how desperately we need people like you right now. So iron sharpens iron. The Bible says, as iron sharpens iron, so does one man uplift another. It's a two-way street. It's an honor to be of service, and I'm glad I could be of service to you. And I thank you for what you're doing out there, saving lives every day. So what are the final two questions?
This has built them up. Might be a letdown. Yeah, so I just want you to imagine you're giving a speech to student paramedics, and they're all dressed in their brand new uniforms. They're about to start their first ever shift. They've never been in an ambulance before. Like, this is their D-Day. They've never seen major trauma or even a dead body. What would your number one tip be for those students?
Yeah. I think it would be the breathing exercise. Mm-hmm. To have that one tool they can use right off the bat. I've got hundreds of case studies in my files, emails and letters people have sent in. And of all the folders, if you will, it's electronically, but of all the folders, the biggest folder by far is the breathing exercise. And all the times that people have used it to save lives. And we know today that taking a swig of water is even more powerful. A swig of water pulls you from fight or flight to rest and digest, from sympathetic to parasympathetic processes. But you don't always have a swig of water. You can always stop and breathe. And if I could give them one tip as they step out the door to face things that they truly can't imagine, that they truly can't be prepared for until they've done it, it would be that breathing exercise in which we're able to reach out and consciously bring the unconscious part of our body under control. And that's the tool I would have them walk out the door with.
Yeah, awesome. I actually have a story about that, drinking water. I heard it you mentioned that earlier on one of your podcasts, and I responded to a patient who was having a panic attack, and there was a bottle of water next to him. I'm like, you know what, I'm going to give this a go. And so I gave the patient a bottle of water. I'm like, just drink this, mate. And he's like looking at me like, what the hell? I'm like, drink it. I like pretty much getting this guy to drink this bottle of water. And it worked. It freaking worked. And like it took a few swigs, like about half the bottle. And I'm there, I'm like, oh, this Dave guy, he knows what he's talking about.
Isn't that something? It's so basic. It is so fundamental. Yeah. Why has it taken us this long to get onto it?
Yeah. So I want to rewrite our protocols. It's going to be drink water.
It's one more tool in the toolbox.
Yeah. I thought it was really good. So there's another way you've influenced my practice. So the goal of this book, The Paramedic Mindset, is to have poise, to possess poise, being able to not be thrown off course despite all those internal, external pressures, being able to think and make really critical decision-making and sound decision-making. Can you share a personal example of a time when you possess poise whilst performing under pressure?
I'll give you an example of a book on spiritual combat, right? I was in Fort Ord, California as a young infantry captain with a company of 120 steely-eyed light infantry warriors, right? And the Pope was coming to conduct mass at Laguna Seca Airfield. There would be like 60,000 people there while the Pope conducted mass, So what did they tap my infantry company to do? To stop the Mongol horde, to do a lightning flank attack? No. All those people, or a big chunk of them, were going to park their vehicles on the airfield at Fort Ord, California, and then get on buses and go to this. And so I was responsible for the process of these people parking their cars, and I got 120 infantry soldiers all night long, and this wave of this pilgrimage of devout people coming to honor the Pope, but towards like it was in the wee hours of the morning, right? A few hours before dawn, an hour before dawn, it was pretty clear that there weren't going to be enough buses. And these people have driven all day long, and they've been up all night long, and there's not enough buses. They start shoving people out of the way, we're talking about shoving the kids aside and shoving the little old ladies aside, and there's this mob trying to get on this bus, and it hit me. They're here to see the Pope. What do you think about this? So I shove my way through the crowd, and I stand up on the first step of the bus. I turn around. I said, people, remember why you're here. And boom, they all stopped. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Oh, I'm here to see the Pope. What do you think about this? And it was amazing. They back off. They let the little old ladies and the families in, and then the next bus showed up. It's the same thing. I jumped to the front and say, people, remember why you're here. And eventually, I think all of them got there. It was a little bit of a scandal, not enough buses at the end, but they got there, and it all worked out. But it's just one of those magic moments when the right words are there. And it's become kind of my motto. Remember why we're here. Why are you here? To save lives, to make the world a better place. You're not here to get stinking filthy rich. You're in the wrong business, at least legally. Yeah. You're not here to be a famous celebrity. You're in the wrong business. Why are you here? Because you want to make the world a better place. You want to use your life in a way that will do the most good. And that is a beautiful and worthy thing. Just periodically take a minute and say, wait a minute, why am I here? What's it all about? And I think there's great value in that, and tapping into that fundamental question. Why am I here? I'm here to help people. I'm here to make the world a better place, and that's a good thing. My goal is pure. My motive is pure. My heart is pure. I've dedicated my life to helping people in their hour of greatest need. And that's a beautiful thing. And when things are coming unglued and you're losing track of your priorities, just take a breath and say, why am I here? That's not a bad thing for most people to be able to think about in this profession above all else. It's a worthy thing to think about.
I think that's a good place to end it. Conversation.